Hey adventurers, today we're going to be doing a book recommendation video. So we picked one book from 4 genres each, some of them overlap, some of them don't, and we're going to be recommending one book that we think a really large range audience would really like from that specific genre. So the genres I have are fantasy, historical fiction, classic, and science fiction.
The genres I've got are fantasy, classic, dystopian, and historical fiction, western type book.
So for my fantasy recommendation, I chose Broken Arrow by Azaria M.J. Durant. This is a debut novel, and I thought it was very well written. Reasons why I would recommend it is because it's a very strong story. The characters are driven, and there's a lot of suspense throughout the book, and it's a story that draws you in and carries you through. I feel like fantasies can be very subjective to readers, especially if you're not specifically interested in fantasy or you're just starting to get into it. It can be kind of hit or miss finding a book that you like, and I think that Broken Arrow would fit a little bit better. I think due to the author's background and the type of things she's read growing up, probably influences this, but it seems like the style itself would be more intriguing to a wider audience.
So for my fantasy recommendation, I went with A Monster Calls. Kate has talked about this book extensively, and it deserves the praise that it gets. The reason why I chose it is not so much because of the fantastical elements that are in it, but because of the themes and the messages that are being shown and portrayed through this story. The way that it's done with the inclusion of the fantasy elements is what makes it such an amazing story, because you're able to tell this story, and I understand that I'm saying story a lot of times, but you're able to tell this story with the fantasy elements in a way that you wouldn't have been able to without them. And no, it's not high fantasy, this would be considered low fantasy, but I think because it's that low fantasy and it could be considered speculative fiction more than fantasy, people are more willing to go into it thinking, this is interesting, rather than thinking, oh, fantasy, I'm not going to read it. And so that's kind of why I chose this one as my fantasy pick.
So for my science fiction, I chose Whipping Star by Frank Herbert. This is the first book in the in the Contingency trilogy. And I've read the second book in the series and I didn't love it. I didn't like it very much at all. But the first book I thought was great. I thought it was a great example of science fiction in that it grabbed a story. I think probably characters and themes were the areas it was weakest, specifically themes, but the characters were there and they were developed. But I grabbed the story and it built the world for the science fiction very, very well, and it created an emotional stake for the reader, and I really enjoyed that about Whipping Star, and I would recommend this to a pretty large audience, I think.
For my dystopian choice, I went with The Giver, no surprise there. And I still haven't finished this quartet, but the first 3 books, although I didn't love book 3, I really respect what they've all done. But book 1 specifically, The Giver, is by far one of the most thought-provoking books I've ever read. It's also super easy to read and super easy to get into, and it's short, so it's a quick, fast read. But that doesn't detract at all from the messages that are being portrayed, that are being showed, and everything about this, the characters, the struggles that they go through, the atmosphere that you're thrust into through the writing of Lois Lowry is just so amazing, and I can't really see many people disliking this book. I can see people not loving it, but I can't see people thinking, oh, that was a waste of my time. And I think that is probably why I chose The Giver as my dystopian recommendation.
So for my classic recommendation, I chose Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And this is a story that's renowned for historical fiction. It's also on the banned book list. So, a couple different reasons. It has a really great representation of American culture that I think there's no reason to hide that or try and put that away or ban that information. It's dumb to ban information, by the way. So, historical fiction, this is not historical fiction. For classics, this is historical fiction too, isn't it? Yeah, Huckleberry Finn is a great option. This is one that I would recommend to everyone because I don't know if I've met anyone who didn't like it. Even if it was hard to get through or they struggled with like the actual story part of it, I think it's something that everyone appreciates having read. And Mark Twain's a really fantastic writer in that his style captures a really broad audience.
For my classic recommendation, I chose The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This one I read I don't know how long ago it was now. It's been probably 6 years. And I thought we had a copy, but I can't find it. So what I remember about this book is reading it and being blown away by the descriptiveness and just the atmosphere of everything that was being portrayed. It's a science fiction, one of the only science fictions that I've read, and one of the only science fictions that I've enjoyed because of that. But I absolutely loved it, and it was so interesting to see a world where even though the humans are at the peak of their power at that point, another alien species comes in and we can't do anything. We are completely exposed. We have no chance, we have no hope for anything. And it's a very common theme used in science fiction, with alien science fiction at least. And it works really well in this story because of you're seeing it through the perspective of one man who is trying his best to survive in this War of the Worlds. And I don't know, I really enjoyed this story as a whole, and it seems like one that people would universally love, or I guess, yeah, I'll go with universally, but yeah.
So the specifically historical fiction choice that I chose was Inside Out and Back Again. This is a book about a little girl who's moving from Vietnam to the US, and it's written in a prose style, so like a combination of journaling and poetry, and it's showing the type of struggles that she experiences as she tries to adjust to an entirely different culture, someplace so very unfamiliar to what she knows, including learning a new language and just understanding social cues which are different due to different cultures and society and things like that. And it's a super interesting read. There's some great themes in here, and although it's been a while since I've read it, I've recommended it to people in the space of time since I read it, probably close to 10 years ago to now. I've continued to recommend this book, so I'm gonna reread it here again soon, but it's definitely a book I would recommend to a range of audience, because I think it's well written, it's very artistically written, and it has a purpose, and it's actually a middle grade, if I remember rightly, and kudos for middle grade authors coming up with real great stories. So a quick correction, this would be hard to exactly put into historical fiction context because it is a first person telling to my understanding. The author is writing the story of her family moving back, so I don't know if it's journalistic in the sense that chronologically everything is included in the proper order, or if she combined experiences to make the story. I don't know for sure, I haven't done that research, but yeah, just for clarification there.
And the last recommendation I have is a historical fiction, and I included with a Western vibe. I was trying to find a Western that I really liked, but I realized that I haven't read a whole lot of Westerns outside of Louis L'Amour, which I really enjoy, but they don't have that wide appeal that I would think, or that I was looking for in each of these recommendations. And so I chose Out on the Pampas by G.A. Henty. This book is about a family that moves to Argentina and homesteads in Argentina and has to kind of build a life there and survive, essentially. And the way the story is told, it's one of the few G.A. Henty's where I was completely immersed and just completely loved every moment of the story. There were some slower parts, like all G.A. Henty books, but they served a purpose in the story in that they were showing the life that was being built by this family, the struggles that they were dealing with, all these different aspects of their life that I really, really enjoyed. And I think that it's, of all the Westerns, if you could call it a Western, that I have read, it's probably the one with the widest appeal that I could see. I mean, it's a classic, so people will read it for that. It's a Henty, which people either love Henty or they don't like Henty. And so there's that. And there's a lot of things going for it that I think would make it the most appealing to a wide range of audiences.
Thank you all for watching an Erudite adventure.
Just so you know, if you have commented on our videos and we haven't responded, that's probably because we can't respond. There's some of the comments that we get notifications for, and we can read them in the email notification, but when you try and go and respond to them, it says they don't exist. So if we haven't responded to your comments, that's probably what it is. Thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video and these recommendations. If you have any recommendations for each of these genres of your own, let us know. We'd love to hear them. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and we have our social media linked down in the description below. Thanks for watching. Stay well.